What's going on, guys? In today's video, you're going to learn about some of the most essential tips and tricks in After Effects, as well as some beginner 3D for creating awesome visualizers like Mac Miller Good News. This is one of my favorite visualizers of all time, one of my favorite songs of all time, one of my favorite artists of all time. I grew up in Pittsburgh, so I grew up on Mac Miller. You guys have probably seen the picture I have in the back. Rest in peace to Mac Miller, one of the greatest of all time. Anyways, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about some things you can do in After Effects to create these repeating collage style music videos. I think you can learn a lot in here that can be applied to any type of video you are creating. So if you do enjoy, please leave a like, comment below what you'd like to see next, if there's any other visualizer or music video that you guys want to see. And as always, if you guys are new here, consider subscribing. So before we get started here, a quick word from the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. With the warm weather season coming back, I think that we're going to see a spike of creative projects that are popping up. What better time to sharpen up your tool set, learn something new, and develop your skills as an artist? I've really been enjoying learning about 3D recently, especially creating these virtual avatars. I've been binge watching this course from Club Visuals using DAZ to implement animation with 3D characters. Super useful stuff here. I really enjoy the balance between different technical things as well as learning some different business skills. If you guys are interested, Skillshare is very affordable, less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. If you guys would like to learn more, the first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. Let's start from scratch. We're going to start off by creating the landscape, and then we'll add in some of these different assets going on here, and then we'll talk about some of the other techniques that they use throughout the video. If you go to pexels.com, they have some royalty-free footage. You can check the link in my description. And what I did was I looked up drone footage and I just looked up desert. So you guys can look through here and try and find something. Downloaded this one here, and then let's pop into After Effects and start getting it set up. So here is the footage I used. If you want, you can right-click, transform, fit to comp, or you guys can scale it up and position it however you'd like. I also want to keep this line even, so I'll click R on my keyboard with this layer selected, and I'll just add a little bit of rotation. So if you want, you can keep your background like that, or of course you can grab your masking tool, just grab this little pen in the top left, and you can cut out parts of the video that you'd like. So if you want, you can just select this area, select the layer, click M. You can bring up your mask and you can add any bit of feathering if you want to keep this edge here a little bit softer. So here's without the feather and here's with feather. Let's go and add our main royal blue color background here, and then we're going to create the sun, create some of this film texture over top of it. So you right click down here in this gray space, we're going to go to new, and we're going to create a new solid. And if you guys want to pull this color directly from the music video, you can use whatever color you want. Just click this dropper. Easier with two monitors, but you click and choose screen color. So I'll name this background, and of course you want to make sure that this background layer is in a layer below your drone footage. And there you go, just like that. We now have a nice little environment similar to that Mac Miller music video. So let's quickly create a sun for our background. I'm going to hold down Alt on my keyboard, and I'm going to click on this shape on my toolbar until I have this little ellipse tool. And then with no layer selected here, that's super important so we're not creating a mask, I'm going to choose my fill color, make it yellow for the sun, and I'm just going to draw a little circle in the middle of my screen here. I can hold down Control and click and drag to reposition that, and that's a little bit too big, so I'll click S and I'll scale it down. So to get it from a circle to a sun, let's go to our effects and presets. We're going to search for the built-in After Effects glow, and we'll place that on our shape layer. Let's grab our glow radius and just bump that up. It's also very solid, so let's add a little bit of a blur. We'll go to our effects and presets and add a radial blur. Drop that on our shape layer. You don't want anything crazy, maybe between 1 and 3 pixels. That looks okay. Another little plugin. Of course, these are all optional. Universe heat wave. If you plop that on there, it'll just give it a little bit of a heat distortion. You can bump that up, and whenever we play, you'll see how that's sort of rippling. So as for this old film overlay that you see here, if you guys go to my website, you can download this VHS green screen pack for free. We have a bunch of old film overlays, which you guys can just drag and drop into your compositions. So I'll grab that and drag it here. And again, that is a link down below. You can download that for free. Make sure you're clicking toggle switches of mode so that you can see this drop down, and we'll change your blending mode to something like add. If you want it to affect only the background and not the sand, what we need to do is hold down shift, grab our shape layer, and let's just move these all below the sand. So this layer right here, I'll name that sand. This is our old film overlay, this is our background, and this is our sun. And then to top it off, we'll go to our effects and presets. We'll search for a noise effect, and we'll go ahead and drop that onto our main background. Let's change off color noise and we'll just add a tiny bit. Now let's go in and start adding some of these assets and start creating these repeaters so that we can have them looping through the scene like you see in the original music video. We're going to talk about using 3D later on in the tutorial. We'll also talk about using 3D to create landscapes because you can create it fully in 3D. And I'm sure that some of these parts, especially here, are just created in 3D. But you can do most of this with just green screen clips that you find on the internet. Free green screen bird flying. You guys can find a bunch of different stuff. So once you've downloaded your clip, we're going to go ahead and grab that and drag that straight into Adobe After Effects. And here's a little intro. So we'll just drag this clip to the left and we'll cut out the part that we want. So we'll click Control-Shift-D and delete this. We'll rename that to bird. And then to get rid of the green, you just need to look up the key light effect. So drop key light onto bird, grab your screen color dropper and just place it on the green. And we're in good shape. So now that we have our background, now that we've brought in some of our assets, let's start showing you some of the key techniques that make this music video what it is. So let's first start with objects coming towards the screen, such as the bird. And then we're going to show you how to spawn in these beautiful flowers and move them into the background. Once you have that basic understanding of how to do it, you can create giant collage stuff like this. You can bring in different elements like these side background things, and you can really flex your creativity with this. Very first thing that we want to do is we want to open up our transform options for our bird layer or whatever it is layer you're trying to change around. Where it says position here, we're going to right click on that and we're going to click separate dimensions. So now you'll see your X and your Y. We want to see the Z. So what we're going to do is we're going to enable this as a 3D layer. So click toggle switches and modes and you see this little 3D cube switch. Go ahead and enable that for your bird. So now you can see your Z position, a bunch more transform options that we can use to transform in 3D space. The main one we're worried about is our Z position. And if you change around that slider, you'll see it moves further away from the screen or closer to the screen, depending on the value. Here's the axis as well. So let's take our Z position to start and we're just going to crank that to the right so that it's sort of starting all the way in the background. Also where it says anchor point right here, at our starting position, let's just create a base little keyframe and you'll see why we're doing that later. So now that we moved it up in Z position, we created that beginning little keyframe. What we're going to do here is we're going to set up an expression to have these repeating towards the camera in a loop. We're going to right click in this gray space. We're going to go to new and we're going to create a null object. And I'm going to right click and rename this null object to repeater control. So in this null object, let's go to our effects and presets and search for a slider control and we'll place that on the null. So now that we have our repeater, let's open up the bird transform options again. And where it says Z position at our starting here, we're going to hold down Alt on our keyboard and we're going to click this toggle animation button. So this should turn red and you'll see how it has our expression here. All you need to do is scroll up a tiny bit so you can see your repeater control. Let's click on that layer so we can see the effect controls with the slider. And now you're going to see this little squiggly, this expression pick whip tool for our Z position. Let's click and drag that onto the slider right here. So you see this little gray barrier box pop up, just connect it there. And then it's going to create this expression. And all you need to do is type after this expression, star index, and click away. So what we did is we linked the Z position of this layer to the slider control that we created, as well as we added this little index expression. So if we were to select this bird layer and click Control D to duplicate, so I'll do that maybe 3 times. Then if we go back to our repeater control, and we take the slider and we crank it, now you're going to see how we have multiple birds which are floating towards the camera in this stack. And it may be hard to see the stack. If you want, what you can do is you can right click in this gray space and create a new camera. And don't get too confused with this. This camera is just to give you an easier perspective on what's really going on. So with this camera, you can click C on your keyboard and just rotate. If you want to rotate everything, just make sure toggle switches and modes is on. Enable everything else as a 3D layer. So just check this all on. And then if we move here, here is what our 2D layer sequence is really looking like. And you can see all of our birds that are lined up this way. And whenever you crank the slider, it's moving them towards or away from our camera. So that's a better visual representation. But let's create a little animation where they're going towards the camera. So hide the visibility of this camera. Again, this is just our test camera. You don't have to get stressed out about changing your composition all crazy. We're back to normal now. So select that repeater control null. We're going to go ahead and set that at 0 at our starting position and create a keyframe. And then we'll drag for however long you want this to be. And then we're going to take the slider and move it in the negative. So drag it to the left so that it's kind of floating off screen like that. So we'll maybe make it -1000. The amount of duplications also matters, so if you want to keep clicking Control D to add some more. But we've created an animation where they're coming towards the screen. The only issue is here is look how close these are spaced together. Whenever we go through our first bird, they just really keep coming quick. And if we go to our test camera again, you can see that there's really not a lot of spacing in between those. So to add some spacing, what we're going to do is just select these bird layers. We're going to click U on our keyboard, and that is the Show Keyframes button. That's why we added that little anchor keyframe before. And if you want, you can delete the keyframe. This is just a little shortcut to get there easier. But what we're going to do is this third value for our anchor point. This is the Z position. You can go ahead and add a little bit of spacing just by changing that value. So for example, you can maybe make the first one -1000. Select the next layer, click U for your anchor point, make that -2000 for the Z, 3000, click U, -4000. So I added a bunch more spacing between these birds. If you guys know an expression where you can do what I just did a lot easier and tie it in with a slider, comment it down below. I'll definitely pin that so other people can see, but that's just what I've been doing so far. It's going to go through the first bird, and then you're going to have a couple of them as you move through. If you look at the original music video, the animation of all these birds is exactly the same. It's staying linear. They're just repeating. So I'm sure that they're using this sort of expression and not just duplicating. This is also faster. You'll see I did it with these doves here, and as I go through the doves, all the wings are exactly at the same pace, and they're repeating the way that I want. So that's why I do it that way. I think that doing it this way is even better whenever you're creating these flowers or roses blooming here, going out towards the camera. So let's do that next. Drawing of a rose. And of course, if you want, you can draw your own images, scan it. You can make your own images in Photoshop, bring it in, whatever you'd like. So we can go to Tools in Google Images here, Color, Transparent, so we have a nice PNG. We won't have to remove any background. So find whatever it is you'd like to bring in here. So we'll right click in here just as an example, and we'll save this little rose. And this is actually a GIF file, so we'll see how that looks when we drag it in. It might be animated. It's not, so it's just a GIF. So either way, let's set this up with that exact same expression. So right click and rename this to rose. Let's go ahead and delete this null. We'll start from scratch again. We're going to show you the inverse way. We'll keep the test camera there. So first, before we set up the slider control and the expression, let's add a little animation where the rose just grows. And this is going to be extremely easy. So select your rose. At the start of your timeline, we're going to click S to bring up scale. And let's just put that at something like 0. Create a keyframe, so click this button. Let's drag a bit, maybe like 1 second, and we'll just pop that up. So we created an easy little keyframe where we have a rose that grows up like that. And for some reason, there's some white flecks here, so I'll just grab my masking tool. I'll draw around the rose. That cleans everything up. Let's create a little stack of them so that we can have 3 of them moving back like in the original music video. So I'll move that one over a tiny bit. I'll click Control D to duplicate it and center it. And then I'll click Control D again, and I'll put this one over here. And let's just sort of space them out so that none of these are getting cut off on the side. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Shift, select all of these rose layers. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to pre-compose them into one. And we'll name that roses. And click OK. So now we have our 3 roses and 1 pre-comped layer here. So now let's set up our repeater like we did earlier with the birds, but this time we're going to have it moving back. Right click in this gray space and create a new null object, and we'll rename that repeater. Go to your effect controls and search for a slider control. Place that on the repeater. Next, you go to the beginning of your timeline and open up roses. Open up transform, and you're only seeing the basic transform because this isn't a 3D layer. So again, make sure you're clicking this toggle switches and modes. You can see that 3D layer switch and enable it. Now we have all this. So what we're going to do, set a little keyframe for our anchor point here, just as a little reference later, and then right click on position and separate the dimensions. Now we can hold down Alt, and for Z position, we can click on its stopwatch. Let's now select that repeater layer so we can see the slider control and the effect controls. Take your pick whip and connect it to the slider. So once you have this expression here, again, you click Shift 8 to add your little asterisks, and you type in index. It seems like a lot of complex steps, but it's really not that bad. Once you do it 1 or 2 times, you'll remember it. So what we can do now is grab our roses layer, and we'll click Control D a bunch of times for however many roses we want to extrude back. Let's take our slider and pump it. Now you can see how they're going. But if we make it positive, you're going to see it disappears. And the reasoning for that is because all this background layer stuff is also a 3D layer from when we were looking at the roses with that test camera. We're going to scroll down here and just find all of our background layers. We'll hold down Shift and click to select them all. Right click and we'll pre-compose them, and we'll name this background. And what we're going to do is we'll leave this as a 2D layer, not a 3D layer, so that we can have all our extrusions look in the way that we want. So that's looking good. We grab our repeater and we push that back. You can see how that's looking. They're shooting forward. So that looks great. Now we just need to add spacing between these flowers so that they're not all stacked up like that. Whenever you're doing this step, make sure you're always at the very beginning here so you're not making new keyframes or things might mess up. But again, what you do is select your first duplication, you click U, and then here's your anchor. You want to make that Z negative. So let's add the spacing at 1000 again. So I'll make it negative 1000, and again negative because we want them to be moving back in Z space. So select the next one, click U, negative 3000. All right, so once we've added in our spacing, let's Control A and close everything. They should now pop all in and you can see some of that gap that we have. Now, the next thing that we need to do is you see how these all bloom at the exact same time? We need to add a little bit of layer spacing. They're coming in one after the other. Just grab these layers and start moving them back and creating some sort of staircase. All right, so here's what we have at that point, still not looking exactly like how we want it, and that's because we need to mess around with our little slider here that we created the keyframe for. So before we set this keyframe at something like positive 1000, let's actually make that negative. So you can just change this until it looks exactly like how you want it. But if we add it negative, maybe something like negative 200, here's what we get here. A lot nicer. And again, you can change around the keyframe. It's really up to you. So again, starting at 0 for my slider, and at 5 seconds, I made it go to negative 218. And I got this animation. Definitely a powerful expression that I don't think a lot of people talk about on YouTube. They talk about it in a motion graphics sense for creating different shapes, but not so much for creating this collage music video style. All right, guys, so let's show you how we can combine those skills to create this sort of collage style where we have different images, different pictures, pretty much the exact same thing. We're just gonna be using masking. We're gonna go ahead and save an image of him, and we'll click Show in Folder and drag that straight into After Effects. So we'll grab our pen tool, and we'll create an easy little mask here. All right, so we masked it out. And again, probably easier in Photoshop because I could have just used my magic selection tool, easily got rid of that. Let's go ahead and just add this into the little repeater that we've already set up. So I'll open up Transform. I'll make this a 3D layer, right click position, separate the dimensions, hold down Alt and set up your Z position. And then let's again show our repeater so we can see that slider. And take your pick whip and connect it to the slider. And of course, all you need to do, add in star index. So now it's moving with our slider. And all you need to do is click Control D to add in some more Mac Millers. And the great thing about this is you don't have to keep this in this kind of accordion style. If you want, you can use that anchor point and you just move these over wherever you like. And if you want to, like the rows, you can add in a little grow animation. And now you should have something like this, where they start to grow in at random spots in your video. So of course you can repeat those steps so that you have a giant collage. It really depends on how much time you want to put into it, how many images you want to put into it. It's really up to you, but those are the main steps on setting up something like that. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, this is a pretty long video. There's a bunch of different scenes that are interchanging. So let's talk about some other stuff. Let's first talk about how we can transition some of our scenes. So this is again, just using green screen. But when you have something like this, where we're changing into the next background, let me show you how we can create these seamless little transitions in any sort of shape you want to create. And this is just using an alpha matte transition. If you want to look more into this, I created this how to create a custom glow or burn transitions tutorial a while back. We used this method and we combined it with different post effects to have it glow or burn. But anyways, if you want to do this, let's go ahead and hold down Shift, select every layer, right click and pre-compose it into one. We'll name this Flower Scene 1. So now we have it all in one layer and we can transition into another. So you can use the beginning steps I showed you with the drone footage, creating the backgrounds to create some more landscapes. There's also hundreds of tutorials on creating these different grid patterns in After Effects or in Blender. I'm going to talk about the 3D a little bit later, but I'm not going to show every little nitpicky step. So to save time, I actually have this motion graphics background starter kit, which is going to be available on my website soon, which has a bunch of these 80s inspired grids, shapes, things like that. So I'll use that to transition in from scene 1 to scene 2. So at about 5 seconds, we'll transition here. So we'll start the second clip there and we'll click Control Shift D and we'll delete this end part. So here's what that looks like. It should just snap to the next part. Let's create that little triangle matte to go from this scene to the next. So in my project bin in the top left, we'll create a new composition, and I'll name this transition. And it doesn't have to be in the shape of a triangle. You can make any shape you want. It's really up to you. So I'll grab my pen tool, and I'm going to change the fill of this to white. And I'm just going to make a little triangle, and we'll position this so that everything is looking all right. So what I'm going to do is I'll click S on this layer, and I'm going to scale it all the way down to 0. Let's go ahead, add our starting position here, keyframe the scale, and we'll drag maybe like 1.5 seconds, however long you want the animation to be. And we'll just take the scale and start cranking it all the way up until the screen is white. So here's the keyframe we made. And you'll notice here that you sort of have this rough edge on the triangle. So if you want, you can go to your effects and presets, and you can search for roughen edges under stylize, drop that on there, and you can just kind of crank that up a little bit if you want to add that. So now let's pop back to our main comp. So tutorial, and let's go ahead and drag in that little triangle composition we just made. So here it is in my project bin, triangle transition. We'll drag that over, and we don't need this long of a comp, so Control-Shift-D, delete. We'll position this in between where we want to transition to from. So where this transition starts, we're going to select bottom clip and Control-Shift-D to make a split there. And we'll drag this end part out a little bit as well. Let's drag this in and connect it here, and let's start setting up a little alpha track matte. So in Flower C1, we're going to click toggle switches and modes until you see this track matte drop down. So we need to rearrange the layers a little bit. Let's take our grid. This is the scene we're going into. Put it at the very bottom. Make sure triangle transition is above our flower scene. And then for our track matte, just set the track matte to alpha inverted for triangle transition. And there you go. Now you can see how it's going to take the alpha channel and create a little transition so that it wipes away. So you can use that exact same technique I just showed you to create the little animated circle growing. If you want to change the colors of the background, just using that same little alpha matte inverted trick with the roughen edges. So now for the rest of this tutorial, we're going to talk about 3D because we've pretty much shown the main gist of everything else. I will get into talking about a little bit of rotoscoping so you can have movement for your subjects here. The rest of this is really pretty 3D heavy. There is some normal green screen stuff going on here where we just have some normal moving through scenes. So let's talk about creating something like this where we have a 3D car, we have our G-Wagon, we have it pixelated, and we have it moving through this 80s environment. We're going to use Blender, which is free, so you guys don't have to pay any money for these software. If you guys are complete beginners, just follow along. We'll still be able to implement that 3D asset. But if you do want to get really into it, again, you can look up any of these Blender's 80s style animation, and you can create the full environment in 3D along with your car or whatever it is you're trying to do. If you don't, you can just follow along what I'm doing to get the car, and then we'll add it to our already pre-made background that we have here. All right, guys, so when it comes to incorporating 3D into your workflow, there's a lot of different paths you can take for this. So for example, finding a car like this, I looked up free 3D G-Wagon. And of course, if you're working on a commercial project, make sure you're checking the licensing. But I use this one from Sketchfab here, where you see the little download button. All you need to do is scroll down here and click download 3D model. And this is a Blender project file, which is great because it's 100% free. If you're completely new to 3D, you want to take a crack at it, download Blender for free so that you can start working with this. I'm going to show you the absolute basics. I'm not going to tie you to just using Blender. Let's show you some other quick and easy ways, for example, using the Element 3D plugin. If you do download that car model and Blender, you just need to double click it to open it up in Blender. Here's what it looks like. So if you want to take the easier methods here, you can export this into any other 3D software that you're comfortable with, or even Element 3D for After Effects. So if I wanted to do that, I would go to File, Export, and I'd export this out as an OBJ, and I'd name this G-Wagon. Then I could pop back into After Effects, right click, go to New Solid, we'll name this G-Wagon, go to your effects and presets, search up that Element 3D plugin. Again, that's only if you have this. I'll leave some info below. Place Element 3D on this layer, click Scene Setup, and then open up the OBJ that we just saved from Blender. We'll use Auto Normals here, and we'll click Normalize Size. All the materials are pretty much embedded, which is pretty nice. But anyways, just to complete the Element 3D method, you click OK here. Now we have our G-Wagon. Let's go into Group 1. We're going to go to Create Group Null, and then click Create. And then we'll right click on that and we'll rename this to Car Control. And this is just an easier null layer to control Element 3D. So you can go in and you can change your rotation here, take your scale and crank back the Z so that it's closer, and you can create keyframes for whatever it is you want the car to do. That's the super easy Element 3D method. Now let's touch on some of the more complicated methods, and this really requires you diving into your 3D software of choice. So if you do want to go full on with Blender, all right, so first off here, if you're viewing the model just like this, in the top right, you can change between the viewport shading or of course rendered view if you want to see what it would look like with your lighting setup. I'm going to click Shift A and we're going to add in a Bezier. Let's switch over to edit mode, and then I'll grab my little move tool, and I can change this Bezier curve so that we can create a little animation of the car moving back and forth. So once you've added in that Bezier curve, I'm going to switch back to object mode, and I'm going to click Shift A again, and let's add in an empty plane axis, and we'll rename this to be car control. Let's drag this all the way up here. Let's also drag Bezier curve out of this scene. I'm going to hold down Shift and just select all of the different parts of the car, as well as holding Control and selecting this top car control empty. Let's click Control P over here, and we're going to parent to object. So now this empty here can be used to control any part of the car, so we can rotate it, we can transform it. Now let's go ahead and select that car control. Over here on my right, you're going to see all these different options. Let's go over to the object constraints, and let's add in a follow path constraint. So for our target, let's take this Bezier curve. I'm going to rename it to path. So reselecting here, take path and put that as my target. Now you'll see if I take this offset value and I kind of crank it to the left and right, we can have our car moving left and right. Let's just create a little bit of easy keyframes just to make that animation. So I'm going to drag this out so we can see here. So at 0, what I'm going to do is for my offset, click this little dot to set a keyframe. And then let's maybe move around 50 frames, crank it to the left, click to set a keyframe, move 100 frames, and we'll move it back here and click to set a keyframe. So we easily created a little animation where it's just moving left and right. You can also select all of these keyframes, right click on them, go to interpolation mode and put that on Bezier. Another thing we can do easily in Blender, which would take a lot more setup in Element 3D, is if you open up the car control here in the top right, these circles here are all of your wheels. You can easily add a little keyframe just to make those spin. So I'll click this yellow square just to see all of my transform options for my first tire. If I select my rotation tool here on the left, again, always in object mode, and I turn this, you're gonna see how my y-axis is changing. So what I can do is at the beginning of my timeline for my y-axis, I'll just click to set a keyframe, and I'll just drag like 120 frames. I'll take the red axis and I'll crank that up. And then of course, always remember to set your keyframe. Here's the animation with the wheel turning. I can repeat that for the other tires. All right, so now we have our animation. All of my tires are turning, which is nice. So last couple of steps. First of all, as you can see, there's a little bit of purple here where we're supposed to load in that image, where we're supposed to load in the logo texture. Over on the right, I'll click on materials and I'll select this plane, which contains all of these main materials. Material number 15 right here is where we're supposed to load in our Mercedes-Benz logo. So I'll just click here in the bottom right and I'll find where I saved that from Sketchfab. So right here, textures, Mercedes-Benz logo, and open it. So that's loaded in correctly. All right, so let's set up our camera and render this back into After Effects. And of course, like I mentioned, you guys can build on it all in Blender if you want. So I'm going to Shift A in object mode and create a camera. We'll click this yellow square to see the transform options for that camera. And better yet, I'll pop out of the camera view and I'll just do it like this. It's probably easier. All right, so now I have my camera in place so that I can have my swiveling car animation going back and forth. I'm going to click over to my render properties. Let's go to film and I'll turn on transparent so that we can just put it in that motion graphics background I had to save some time. Let's go to the output properties, and scrolling down here, you guys can create PNG sequences, or if you really want to, you can change your file format to something like FFmpeg video and just export it out straight as a video animation. So if we go to encoding, we'll put that on QuickTime. Let's click this folder for output and we'll create a new folder for where we'd like to save this. Also, this animation is about 100 frames, so we'll set the end at 100. Back in our render properties, you can choose your render engine, cycles or EV. Also, I haven't even touched any of the lighting. There should be a default light in there. Make sure you pop over to rendered view just by clicking here, and we'll take the power and we'll raise the radius of this so that you can start seeing the reflections on the car. You can also change the positioning if you'd like so that we can get something nice. Also, to be able to render this out with transparent background or your video codec here, if we just drop this down, we want to change this to something that has RGB plus alpha. So we'll change the video codec to QuickTime animation. Now we can select RGBA. That way, when we go up to render animation, this will render with a transparent background. And with Eevee, it's pretty fast. If you want to use cycles, it'll be a lot more in-depth and kind of render it frame by frame. But if you want to get something quick, this is a nice, simple way. All right, so our render is complete back in After Effects. We can go ahead and just drag in that file that we just created. So here's the MOV, let's drag that in, and then let's drag this over our background, and there you go. Easy as that, even for someone who's never really done 3D before. But you can use those tips just to be able to add some basic animation and incorporate those 3D tools into your editing or VFX or video creation workflow. Let's add mosaic onto here as well. Bump those up. And then I found this video here where we have this wide angle so that we can rotoscope out one of these. So as an example, let's rotoscope this out to throw into our composition here. So I'm going to double click on this layer so that we're in a layer and not a composition. If I'm going a little bit too fast here, just watch my full rotoscope guide where I go step by step in a lot more slow way. Either way, grab your roto brush tool at this point, and I'm going to go ahead and draw in the general area, and then using the green part of the roto to draw in, and then if you hold down Alt, you can cut away. And Roto Brush 2 is pretty solid, so if we click page down on our keyboard, we can move through here and make any adjustments if we really need. All right, so once you've marked out your selection, just Control, Alt, and mouse wheel in here so you can see this little selection area for your Roto Brush. We're gonna end it here because that's the amount of frames I wanna freeze. And then we're gonna start it at this little blue box and then click freeze. And then back in our composition, you guys will see easy as that. We have a rotoscoped out little clip, and you guys can also adjust feather here. You can reduce chatter. You can also use the beginning step with the repeaters with these rotoscoped or GIFs or whatever to add more motion. All right, guys, so I hope you did enjoy the video. A lot of different useful things. Again, don't sleep on 3D, especially when there's free softwares like Blender available to you. You can make so many different things with this. Like I mentioned before, comment below if you'd like to see a different visualizer or music video done. I'm planning on recreating some viral visualizers, some really cool stuff. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting, and I'll see you guys in the next one.